All right, everybody, what is up? GC Live, Wes Mitchell, Chris Clark, brought to you by our guy Clint Hammond of CMG Home Loans, ClintHammond.com, 803-422-6797, NMLS number 71597. Like we always tell you, if you're in the market for a new home, hit up our guy Clint. If you're not in the market for a new home, but you think you maybe one day will be, then also hit up our guy Clint. He's going to help walk you through that process. He is going to tell you, hey, this is how much money you need to be saving. This is how much you need to be planning for. These are all the hidden financial aspects that you maybe don't know about. And then also the other side of it, hey, here's some planning things you can do. Here are some options for that mortgage that maybe you didn't know about in the positive as well. So 803-422-6797 and ClintHammond.com for more information about our guy Clint and all the services that he provides.
And if you're in the market for a new or used vehicle, or if you think you may be here in the near future, check out our friends over at Ferry Chevrolet, Fairey Chevrolet, ferrychevrolet.com, or 803-937-4531, conveniently located in Orangeburg, so right there between Columbia and Charleston. But if you can't get over there right now, good news, check out their website, ferrychevrolet.com. You can check out all of their new and used inventory, their financing options. They've got options to get in contact with them. You can also call them at 803-937-4531. In business since 1926, right here in the Palmetto State. That's our friends at Ferry Chevrolet.
What up, Garnet Yardbird? Hope you're doing well. Hope everybody else in the chat is doing well too. We got some Gamecock football to discuss as South Carolina. No spring game, Chris, but they did have spring practice. I'm with you. A little bit of FOMO, a little bit of old man yells at clouds, a little bit of just it didn't feel right, man. It just did not feel right to me. Spring games, in a lot of ways, yes, you could say they're meaningless, but I do think getting out there, seeing the guys, letting the young players get in front of the crowd, like there are some advantages to the spring game. There are advantages for us to get out there and just put eyeballs on these players. You get at least a half worth of some of your top guys going out there and playing. So, and I miss being able to be in the booth and be involved with calling the games, which is something we don't do during the regular season. So, frankly, I did miss it, but we still had spring practice. We still got eyes on some guys. And I feel like we had some developments, you know. I don't know if we had like major surprises, but certain things that were questions coming in, certain things that we were curious about. I think we at least answered some questions. I think we at least had some guys emerge who maybe we didn't know that they were going to emerge.
Yeah, very true. By the way, guys, if I have to pause, the pollen's killing me, even though I'm inside. I just felt a massive sneeze coming on. It has not happened yet. If it does, it's going to look funny for those of you on the video version, but I'm sorry. Yeah, I mean, I think the big thing, man, to go back to the beginning of the spring, just with the amount of roster turnover that you get naturally these days, and South Carolina is bringing in, I mean, there's a handful of guys from the freshman class that are not here yet, you know, Darius Gray, Caden Ramsey, a few other guys. But just getting eyeballs on some of these new guys and just seeing, you know, how they're going to integrate into the team. What do some of the freshmen just look like in terms of even if they don't play a lot this year, you know, does the staff feel like they're hits? Do they look the part? What do they look like physically? And then obviously for the transfers, there's kind of varying levels. We all have our ideas. Okay, there's probably going to be multiple starters from the offensive line. There's probably going to be a transfer or two that's more of a depth guy. How much does a Nitro Tuggle, who you bring in to compete, does he make a move throughout the spring where he exits the spring looking like, does he like a depth guy? Does he like a potential starter? What do we hear? You know, here's another one. I mean, this year, the most, as we've said, the most coaching turnover that Shane Beamer's had in a spring going into a new season. And so that's Deion Barnes on the defensive side. But of course, it's also the new coaches on the offensive side of the ball with Stan Drayton and Randy Clements. And then, of course, the one that everybody talks about the most because it's the actual system is Kendall Briles. And so there's a lot to unpack. I think there are some things we learned. I think there are some questions that remain. And to start looping in Shane Beamer's comments a little bit and with, you know, what we thought from what we observed and heard this spring, it seems like he feels pretty good about just the offensive installation and how that's kind of helped Lenore Sellers and Matt Fuller and some of the other guys. Seems like there's still some concern at the kicker position, right? Concern, is that too strong? Maybe uncertainty is a better word, because they don't really know. This looks like the guy. That's a competition that looks like it's ongoing. And then just some positional battles too, and trying to figure out how much do certain guys play this year, and they'll have every opportunity, obviously, throughout the summer and preseason too. So I think we learned some things, still some questions, a lot to continue to unpack now that spring ball is over.
Yeah, and I do think because we didn't get a spring game, because that there's pretty much there's I don't think there was less viewing time this spring than last spring, but in today's modern college football, like, you just do not get a ton of viewing time in terms of true, like, scrimmages or 11-on-11 or anything like that. So you're more kind of beholden to what people are telling you. And in this case, with no spring game, I feel like we kind of have to lean on those spring awards a little bit, man. Like, in an era where coaches are, I would say, more hesitant than ever to, like, tell you, oh, this guy is number 1 on the depth chart, that guy is number 2 on the depth chart. You can ask coaches about a position. It feels to me like coaches used to be a little bit more like, hey, this guy is doing great, he's leading the way. This guy, that coaches just don't want to give away that information as openly as they used to. The best we have in terms of an official representation, to the closest thing we have to any type of depth chart, is this list of spring awards. And so, like, if a guy is truly your offensive player of the spring, if a guy is most improved, if a guy is a newcomer of the year, they did something right, and the staff is admitting, hey, this person did something to grab our attention. And so I tend to think, man, when Matt Fuller, when Peyton Williams on defense, like, I really don't think I would have had either of those guys entering the spring as my favorite to win either of those awards. That's not a knock on either guy. I just wouldn't have picked them as my prediction to win those awards. So, Justin Okoronkwo, you think about it now, with Justin's skill set, with some guys on special teams kind of moving along, probably are some great opportunities for J.O. to help out on special teams. That makes sense too. I think in retrospect, all these do make sense. With Matt, we did hear quite a bit about Matt Fuller and reported quite a bit about Matt Fuller. I just think it is noteworthy that all those guys rose to the level of MVP, essentially, on their respective sides of the ball, which, there's been a lot of great safeties come through here. There's been some pretty darn good running backs at times coming through here too. So I think those are reason for fans to be somewhat excited about the progress of those two guys on offense and defense.
Yeah, and the run game's been such a topic of conversation, rightfully so. I mean, it's not just a 1-year sample size where you can look at it and say that South Carolina didn't run the ball effectively enough last year. It's been that way many times other seasons too with Shane Beamer's teams. 2024 was the outlier. You had Rocket Sanders. You obviously had Lenoris back there. You had some veterans on the offensive line. And while they still struggled some in pass protection, they were pretty good running the football. That team finished top 25 rushing, and they were able to score a lot of points, particularly in the back half of the year. But that's something that Shane Beamer clearly wanted to fix, right? Offensive line change, scheme change, running backs coach change, but a combination of bringing in 3 guys from the portal and then returning 3 guys for what has been a very competitive room. We all know that Matt Fuller has talent. Like, we've saw it in high school, 4-star guy, lots of production. We've seen some glimpses of it even here at Carolina. Beamer pointed out today, not that it was glamorous, but you're getting out there at the end of the Kentucky game and you can run the football effectively and move the chains, and Kentucky can't get the ball back, right? The long 72-yarder that he broke off against LSU for a touchdown was a very impressive run and shows you kind of what he's capable of. It really seems like this new offense under Kendall Briles has allowed him to play faster. And that's not just him. I think that's everybody. But it's really been, I think, a big benefit for someone like him who is just really talented with the football in his hands. So that definitely spoke volumes. Tyler Head, our producer and co-host on our radio show, Wes, he pointed out today, typically your offensive player of the spring is a quarterback award. 2021 was, I think, the last time Nick Muse and DeCarrion Joyner, who was a receiver at the time, split it. Typically it's a QB. It says something. I don't think it says anything negative about Sellers as much as it's just a positive for Matt Fuller. Every time we got some practice feedback or maybe some scrimmage feedback, Wes, from talking to sources, Matt Fuller always came up, as, hey, he looked really good running the football. And quickly on Peyton Williams, he's kind of forgotten, right? He's a guy who's been around a long time. He's been solid when he's been in there. And I think most people probably had him penciled in as a starter, but to hear that he was the player of the spring on defense, I think makes you feel probably better about that position overall.
Yeah, and I think Peyton probably had a better year last year than he's given credit for. I'm pulling up his numbers now. He was involved with the football, if that makes sense. He was around the ball. He had 2 interceptions. He had a forced fumble. I'm trying to remember, I feel like a couple other opportunities to pick a ball off where he's in the exact right spot and, just didn't hold on to the ball. But you're going, man, that was another opportunity he created. You'd like to see him finish it. And I imagine finishing some of those plays, it was a big topic for him going into this year. And certainly from what Clayton White said when he spoke, I guess that was maybe a week ago, just being the leader of that secondary. And I think that there's quite a bit of trust to be given the kind of keys to the secondary room here. And, I really liked how Clayton put it in terms of, hey, there's times where I'm like, I being Clayton, there's times where I feel like I can correct this, but I'll look at Peyton and say, well, you go correct that. And just kind of empowering your leaders to go be a leader and leaning on them and making them do some things that maybe they didn't exactly have the full comfort level to go do before, but making them feel like, hey, this is part of the gig now. This is part of the job for you. So, yeah, I think both those things are noteworthy. Man, I do feel like we have talked about, as we go through some of these other guys on the list, you and I have talked about Noah Clark quite a bit. There are some on here, and I wrote about this a little bit on, I guess maybe Sunday. There are some guys on here that you go, it's not really a surprise based on what we've been hearing and what we've been reporting, but it's still worth noting. And, Tomiwa being a co-newcomer of the spring, not really surprised. This is a guy who's done it pretty consistently last couple of years at the Power 4 level. So he comes in, kind of just continues what he had been doing. Noah Clark, Mike Tyler being someone who was listed as most improved, Anthony Addison being most improved. None of those would I categorize as surprises, but still noteworthy that to me it was almost like there's a confirmation that what we're hearing is on track with how the staff feels. Because not to dive too much into it, but when we hear things, we are hearing them from all different places. You know what I'm saying? And so sometimes it may be you indirectly hear, hey, the staff feels this way and that way about a certain position. Or it may just be you're getting the opinion of someone who watched practice. So to get some confirmations on these guys, I mean, with Sean Elliott has actually really talked up Mike Tyler the day that he did his press conference as well. So I feel like we already had quite a bit of confirmation that we were on track with our reporting on that, but still good for those guys, man. You always want players taking a step forward and raising their level of play. And I feel like we need to maybe split this up and go into some of those guys individually. But with Beamer today, even saying, hey, we may have underestimated Noah Clark's athleticism at that size. And that that made me think Noah was recruited because he's a massive kid, can come in, can play nose tackle. He's a good football player. Appears to be a really just awesome young man, great family, all those things. And then you get him in and you're like, wait a second. He's not just a gap plugger, basically. He can go do everything. And then you're going, wait a second. This guy is actually pretty rare. So, I mean, I think while I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, I do think you can this is a check the box. This is why you still recruit out of the high school ranks. This is a guy you brought in that you're going to be like, do everything in your power to keep him on campus for 3 years type talent potentially.
Yeah, definitely. And, it remains to be seen, like, a question that I have is, even given that, like, how much does he play this year? Because he is a freshman playing very close to the ball. Some people say the closer the ball you play, the harder it is to play. I think there's some truth to that. And you got some veteran guys ahead of him. Tommy, who you just mentioned, Gabriel Brownlow-Dendy's back. You got Troy Pikes. They're guys, Kelby Collins, that have played a lot of football. But I think everything you hear on him is very encouraging. We saw this guy in camp during high school, and I do remember kind of thinking, like, he does, he moves pretty well for his size, but I feel like now that he's gotten into the strength and conditioning program, movement is something that Luke Day is so big on. It's not just, if you ever hear Luke Day talk or even watch what they do on some of the videos, you'll be like, man, they do some crazy kind of stuff. It's because they try to relate things to football. It's not just how much can you squat, how much can you bench.
Functional movement,
yeah. And so I think that has helped Noah like get even better in those categories. And so he's been, I would say, not that South Carolina, certainly they really liked him out of high school, but I think he's been surprising, I would say, in terms of just how ready he's looked and how well he moves. And, could that mean he carves out a little bit of a role this year? Maybe so, but I like what you said. I mean, for the future, you feel like you hit it, and it's kind of seems, Wes, like South Carolina feels like they hit on the portal and high school acquisitions at defensive tackle. Because, Aiden Harris, heard some good things about him throughout the spring. The other high school get, you look at Jordan Thomas, came from Georgia, massive human being. Tommy, Kelby, these guys have played a lot of football. Kelby's been at 2 different SEC programs. He was on, one of the awards lists. So I think these guys have brought some leadership. And man, I think the defensive tackle room, don't take this to mean they're going to be a juggernaut this year, right? But when you look at comparing them to the other rooms on the roster, this might be one of the better, maybe the best group, I think, on the team this year. And there were some questions going into this year. So it seems like they did a good job of building that room this offseason.
Yeah, no, that I think in terms of the competition there it'll be fascinating to see how quickly the cream can rise to the top if Noah is as rare as it appears that he is, even as a true freshman. Because, dude, we've all seen it, though. Some guys, it's just easy for them. Like, some guys are just too good not to – like, they just find their way on the field. It just happens. And it's a different position, but, like, we saw that with a Nick Eamon Ward. Was not like a starter day one, but he just fate gets him on the field, and then he never leaves the field. So what happens there? But, I mean, dude, on paper coming into this thing, you were looking at what? Very rough draft of a depth chart. Gabe, Brownlow-Dendy, and I guess Tommy Waugh, you would say maybe as starters. Then next in line, maybe Kelby and Troy Pikes. I mean, you're 4 deep already. Then next, maybe Jordan Thomas and Noah Clark, potentially.
Yeah, pretty good.
That's not even counting Aiden. So, that was a spot too where I think you looked at what happened with Devontae Miles and you were kind of going, he was not going to be a starter, but are you suddenly a little bit more concerned about the depth at that spot? And I don't really think there's a concern there at all in terms of what the that position may look like. You probably are going to have 3 or 4 guys that are just going to rotate a lot at that spot, but how that actually sorts out among that group should be it'll be a good problem to have. I think is the best way to put it. Let's go through a couple of these other guys, man. Anthony Addison had by the way, so I'll give a little preview. Right before we hopped on, I was talking to Seth Smith, the transfer offensive tackle, who he's going to be our Garnet Trust interview for Thursday, pre-record. And one, he confirmed what Armando Neves told me, that Anthony Addison is that guy that is like 40 yards downfield at the defensive end, chasing down a running back to save a game, basically, from being, a touchdown. And he also said that on his official visit to South Carolina, Luke Day had them doing bear crawls in the weight room as visitors, which I was like, that is the most Luke Day. And he was like, now I'm not saying, like, it was just very basic stuff. He wasn't like putting us through a workout. Like, I guess he didn't want to get Luke in trouble or anything.
Right,
like,
yeah.
But I was like, dude, that's the most Luke Day thing ever. He was just like kind of giving him a little show of what a warm up is. I mean, if you've been to some of Luke Day's demonstrations, like, he always kind of does the building from the ground up, like demo thing. So anyway, I was like, that is perfect. But Anthony Addison has I don't know, like, we've mentioned him a little bit in our reporting. I don't know if we have maybe mentioned him enough leading up to kind of what we're hearing here at the end.
Yeah, and I think if memory serves, Wes, he got some kind of post-spring award last year too, I think. And kind of similar to Matt, there's a list of guys that throughout the spring, I think, you and I compare notes all the time. We hear a lot of the same things. And Anthony Addison was on that list of guys that we consistently heard about. Matt Fuller was one. I'd say Nitro became one. Jazavian Currents, I think was one defensively. Julian Walker at times. There's a bunch of guys. Anthony Addison was always on that list. I've had several people he was in the backfield a ton at practice, et cetera, et cetera. Heard that for the last practice that he was in the backfield a ton, and just has such a high motor. And in a lot of ways, he reminds me a little bit of Brian Thomas Jr. I remember seeing BT in high school. It was when Mike Peterson was the edge coach. Muschamp was still the head coach. Got his offer at camp that day, and you see him. And I remember BT telling me on an interview we did later, he was like, yeah, when I did that camp workout, I was 195 pounds. He eventually becomes what he was as a senior last year, which I think was 245, 250. Still wasn't the longest guy that you'll ever see, but he had just some natural pass rush ability, played with a huge motor. And so along those same lines, Anthony Addison in high school, kind of undersized. He just physically looked more like a linebacker, but he has that pass rush juice and he has a tremendous motor, and that counts for something. Is he going to be an every down, this year, every down type guy? Maybe not, but can he step in at least somewhat to that void that Brian Thomas Jr. is leaving, which was pretty significant last year? He did a lot of good things for you. Can he end up being, someone who helps you out in those pass rush situation? It does look like it's trending that way. He's got to continue it, obviously, but it seems like it was a really, really good spring for him.
For sure. Coleman Johnson asked, what's Drayton's philosophy on how many guys will play in each game? How will he split carries? I'm trying to think. He said a lot in his press conference did Stan Drayton. Chris, do you remember if he gave specifics on this? I feel like Kendall Briles at one point actually talked a little bit about running back rotation, but I don't remember Drayton addressing it specifically.
Yeah, I'm not remembering anything specific he said. I will say I did. I think I'm going to go back and look at this in more depth because it was actually something on my mind that I started doing some research on recently. To go to the most recent example, you think about Penn State last year. Obviously, Penn State had a pretty good group of backs. One of them was Jabri Coleman, who redshirted and is now here at South Carolina. I think something to keep in mind about Penn State is they had a couple pretty good dudes at running back last year between Nick Singleton and Katron Allen. And those two guys got the absolute bulk of the carries. I think part of it is just it's a very competitive room. You can't play 6 guys. You can't play 5. You can't play 4 guys. You probably can't play 3 in terms of unless there's injuries. I don't think we're going to get through this season and say these 3 guys had very, very similar carries if everybody's healthy, unless one guy's playing at the beginning of the year, kind of the performance drops off, somebody else gets in. You know what I mean? And it ends up evening out. I think the more likely scenario is probably there's a starter, maybe there's kind of a a 1-2 punch type. But also if there's one, and Shane Beamer's talked about this in the past too, if there's one guy who has established himself as the best running back on the team, he'll probably get the most carries. So I think that's still honestly an ongoing question. And I think the guys in the room in a lot of ways are going to solve that, who plays the most, who earns it at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think right now Matt Fuller and Christian Clark sound like your first 2 guys up. That's a little bit of reading between the lines, a little bit of, hey, Fuller is the player of the spring on offense. Like, that doesn't mean those other guys cannot maybe elevate and have a great rest of the offseason and change that. Because I do think there's some talent with those other kids too. So I don't think it's just locked in, but I think based on the totality of those 15 practices, pretty safe bet to say that for those guys. I really liked what Beamer said about Landon Duckworth and why he got the Spirit Award. That so if you guys have seen the photos from practice, the guys on the offense at quarterback have GoPros essentially on their helmets. And so what you can do is use that a variety of ways. If you're a coach, you can see exactly what your guys are seeing. You can teach off of it. You can see if they were looking at the right guy. You can go back and look at coverages through the view of a quarterback. But they also record audio. And I liked what Beamer said about Landon in that even if it's not Landon involved in a play, Landon's on the sideline. Landon's basically fighting for third team reps right now. Lenoris makes a play. Landon is yelling in support of his QB. Somebody else makes a play. Landon is run out there, running his mouth in a good way and just being a highly, highly supportive teammate. We had heard that basically his teammates love this guy. Like, everybody loves Landon. He's got a very unique personality, got an outgoing personality, and just is one of those guys you like having around, like having in your room. So I will also say, let me send out my request for Justin King. Can we get a spring ball wrap up of Landon Duckworth's GoPro?
Yes.
camera?
That's a great idea.
Kendall Briles, Coach Beamer, all those guys can approve it to make sure we're not getting, we don't want to give away the scheme. We don't want to give away the reads for, the top secret offense or anything like that. But just Landon running, yelling, being a great teammate, excellent content.
Landon being Landon.
Yes.
I like it. That's a great idea. Seems like something they would do too. Seems like right up their alley. He's, I think, we didn't get to see a lot of him this spring, obviously, because the portions of practice that we're watching, for the quarterbacks, it's a lot of throwing on air. Now, I think you can take away a little bit from that. Like the ball does jump, from Landon. To go back, I remember Alabama Mississippi All Star game and Cody Belair, who helps Charles Power out on the scouting and rankings team for Rivals. Mentioned like, hey, this guy throws the football very well. Maybe better than expected, I would say, based on kind of what Cody said about that situation. And so, you look at Lenoris as the starter, Cutter's the second guy up in there, and the staff also very high on Cutter. But I think having that type of camaraderie in the room certainly helps. And you can tell Shane Beamer, somebody who values that so much, values having somebody like Duck in the quarterback room and on the team. Those things certainly matter in terms of support. So he's almost like a mascot in a way, like he's and he's not a mascot in the sense of like he's a walk-on or something who never has a chance to see the field. He's just running scout team. Like he's a guy that obviously he has talent and he potentially has a future here too. But I think he's playing his role really, really well. And he has a really good personality too.
Chris, a couple other guys on here. Toughness Award, Carter Miller, Nitro Tuggle. On offense, on defense, Caleb Herring. The other Spirit Award went to Kelby Collins. A couple other guys we didn't mention earlier. Newcomer of the spring on offense. We talked about defense. DJ Black, a little bit of a surprise to me there, but a good sign for him. Kojo Poku, someone we've heard kind of just shows up, puts their head down, does their job, goes to work. Pretty good quality to have in an offensive lineman, if you ask me. And then Keenan Britt on special teams, the newcomer of the spring. Any surprises there for you among that group, or just noteworthy thoughts on that?
I think I maybe wouldn't go surprise necessarily on DJ, especially because, like I wouldn't have been surprised if it was, Nitro Tuggle or Christian Clark or somebody like that. Nitro obviously already was a co-winner of the Toughness Award. I assume they're wanting to give out, one guy per award, or not have one guy win more than one award. But, DJ Black is a player that I think remains very fascinating because I honestly think some people are just kind of glossing over that acquisition. Again, a guy that has played a lot of football at the college level, has an interesting story because he's from the state. He started his career at South Carolina as a walk-on, was just a student, and then walked onto the program, moved to Limestone under Mike Fury, played at UCF, and now back here. So he's played a lot of ball. He can really run. And another thing that we've heard, Wes, is, he's got a chance to, we'll see what happens at receiver. I'm not going to be shocked if he pulls down legitimate receiver reps this year. He's, I think, part of that conversation, but I think has a chance and a profile to be a really good special teams player too, with his speed and just that skill set. That's something that I think he'll play a pretty prominent role this year on special teams.
Receiver room right now, I mean, you think it's probably Nick Harbor, obviously, Jaden Sellers, Nitro Tuggle, more than likely the ones, Donovan Murph, Mazio Bennett, maybe DJ Black.
Yeah. Very competitive room, very competitive. I think I agree with your like post-spring analysis of the ones. I think Nitro made a big move. Kind of the back half of spring. I think he made a really big move. And Jaden Sellers just has such a chemistry with Lenoris, being his brother and all. That certainly helps. But he just, he really came on the end of, back half of last season. And I think he's kind of carried that over. The not that the first group couldn't change, but that second group is just where you get the sense of like, it's going to be a tight race, I think, because you still got summer, you still got preseason. And I think if you go up and down the list of guys on the roster, you kind of every now and then you'd hear something good about almost all of them, So I think the consistency is really going to be key. That's what they're going to be looking for in terms of who ultimately earns that playing time, once the season rolls around.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of forgotten guys last year, Lex Cyrus, Jordan Gidron. We've heard good things about those guys too, man. So I think it's easy to kind of out of sight, out of mind with some of those super talented former 4-star receivers, but still have a chance to help this team ultimately. Garnet Yardbird mentions Jaden Gibson. I mean, Jaden Gibson still remains the one guy out of this bunch that I think has the biggest outcome, like the biggest potential outcomes for him. If he gets back to 100%, and he was not able to go through spring, if he gets back to 100%, he could move up this entire depth chart. Or if he doesn't, then it's going to be hard for him to make an impact. So there, to me, is just a wide range of potential outcomes with Jaden Gibson, but super talented guy, man. So just another one to keep an eye on. Just kind of, I don't want to say long term. I mean more long term through this off season as we get into the preseason and what do we hear going into preseason? Is it that Jaden Gibson is still working to get back, or is it that he was 100% in the summer? He's been able to get back to football shape, and he is ready to roll. I think will be the thing you want to track there. Another thing to track, injury update from Shane Beamer. Didn't really mention other guys, but was asked directly about Dylan Stewart, who said continues to just need rest. Said it's not like we send him to a doctor and he makes a couple of adjustments and he's good to go. He jumps right back in the weight room. He just needs rest. That is the plan for him right now. And that's about the same, Chris, as what Beamer said about Dylan a couple of weeks ago when they initially shut him down completely.
Yep. And to go back to, I don't think Beamer said this piece today again, even though a lot of it was very similar, but basically he was, coming along and starting to do some things. And then they just kind of got to the point of, hey, talk to the doctor is the best thing to do. Don't do anything, just rest. And, there was so much conversation at the end of the year about Dylan. And the reality was that he was playing banged up, and I think you could see that if you paid attention on the field as well. That was certainly the case. And so just needs to rest. Obviously, that's a big one that didn't go throughout spring for you, similar to, different injury, different recovery. But Jacarius Peak, you also didn't have him. A couple guys that I think Gamecock fans are kind of hanging on every word, trying to figure out what is the timeline, when will they be back. I don't think we have that on Dylan Stewart right now, but just continuing to rest and hopefully can get back, to full speed as soon as possible in time for the season.
For sure, man. Was there anything else from Beamer in particular, Chris, that you feel like we need to hit that we didn't hit? I actually wish, and I think maybe we can do this for some of our future Garnet Trust interviews. I want to ask the guys about what they think of the new kind of practice structure. From what Beamer said, that's one of the things he's asking guys in exit interviews. Sounds like it really was a pretty different approach than what we've seen South Carolina use before. He mentioned, thinking it's a net positive. There are some things they still maybe want to tweak moving forward, but it kind of sounds like that. And for those who didn't see it, it's like kind of a steady build up throughout the week in terms of install day one, some walkthrough type stuff leading up to almost full scrimmaging on day 3. It sounds like that may be here to stay for the most part.
Yeah, it was a change that they looked at making this offseason and implemented it. And I don't think, Beamer would get up there and say, not that it was, but I don't think he'd get up there and say, oh, it was terrible, we're going to scrap the whole thing, right? I think there was a lot of thought that went into it. But it does, you're right, we do need to ask some players about it, but particularly the ones that have been here, right, that have that comparison point of what was it like last spring versus what was it this spring, last preseason to this spring. It is different. And, they made, I think, several strategic adjustments. There were adjustments in terms of just doing more teaching time back in January, more of the football 101 stuff to where they're building up, not going out on, Tuesday and, hey, it's time for full team scrimmage. And I think that was probably more important this year when you are installing a new offense, and you've got a decent amount of transfers who, even though they've played ball at other places, most of them, you're still introducing them to a brand new defense. So feedback seemed to be pretty good on it, but I agree. It would be interesting to hear some more detailed thoughts from the players there.
So you got anything else on Beamer or anything you feel like we missed on that?
I think we brought this up earlier. The kicker battle, I think, is something that I kind of think we had the feeling that maybe midway through spring, it was kind of tracking to, hey, I don't know if we're going to have an answer on this thing, coming out of spring. It certainly seems like that's still the case between Upton Belafant and Max Kelly. Seems like that thing, we're getting to preseason camp and going to have another battle. I think the question there is, does someone begin to separate in preseason camp, or does it go up to game one? Both of them have talent. Belafant has obviously more in-game experience. Does that end up helping push him over the top? We'll see. But that's one of the position battles where you could tell it's still kind of on their mind of, okay, let's figure something out here. And that battle is going to need to continue. I don't think they have an answer on that yet. And that's not a huge surprise.
But certainly a spot, as we've seen, that if you get in a bunch of close games, can impact whether you're winning, whether you're losing, and will be one, though, I think definitely want to try to get taken care of before we get into the end of, certainly by the end of preseason. That was something that went a little bit down to the wire last year, too. So we'll see if that ends up being the case this year. Elsewhere in Gamecock athletics, Chris, portal is wide open right now. It's been interesting to me trying to follow the men's basketball portal compared to the football portal, the differences in how it's covered, the similarities in how it's covered. Definitely, there are more names out there than what have been put out publicly for South Carolina, to be sure. However, I do think there's at least a decent grasp right now with the guys that are being talked about for South Carolina. I'm not saying this is like all of their top targets, but for the most part, like the guys you've been hearing about, the guys people have been writing about here in the local media are the ones to pay very, very close attention to. We knew that Corey Mincy was a big target for South Carolina. They got him wrapped up right off the bat. Pretty simple recruitment there. Good for them to go ahead and be able to check that box. But they have found themselves in some absolute battles moving forward. And as it's kind of played out, Samet Yigitoglu from SMU, very, very much a big boy basketball version of a recruiting battle right there. You look at Rowan Brumba, very much a big boy basketball recruiting battle there. And so I think you're very much looking at a spot right now for South Carolina men's basketball where if, Chris, they can close out some of these recruitments, does it shift the way fans look going into this offseason, going into next year, just a little bit? Like, will it be enough on paper, you think, for – I know some fans are going to be wait and see regardless. But – and if you're in the chat, I would love to hear your thoughts. If South Carolina closes out on Brumball, on Samet, on a guy like a Carter Knox, there's actually a kid that I don't think has been talked about as much, Chris, and Shane Blakeney, who is the kind of guard wing at Drexel. I actually think there's a decent chance, assuming they keep pushing, that he ends up at South Carolina. So do you think that group of guys gets people excited going into next year beyond the group of people that are just going to be like, I don't care until I see the basketball going through the hoop?
That's right. Yeah. And there's going to be a lot of those. And you know what? Fair. Fair. Because this team had a pretty substantial rebuild last season in terms of the portal, and it didn't go obviously very well. But it's a new year. And, the really good team that Lamont Paris put together The Talon Cooper, BJ Mack, like that group had a lot of portal in it as well. And so best you can do right now with the current situation is try to run it back and bring in guys. And they are in, that's maybe something that maybe a little bit of a different feel this offseason, Wes. I mean, obviously some of the guys that they ended up getting in for the last class, obviously had other offers to go other places, but can they close on maybe a higher clip of guys that had been identified early in the process from the start? Because there have been some portal misses that have been pretty notable. If these are your guys, can you close on them at a higher clip? And with Submet, with Rowan Brumbaugh, some of these other guys that are on the board, there is some pretty substantial competition this year. These are some guys that are, for whatever transfer portal class rankings are worth, that are pretty highly thought of. So I do think if they can close on some of them, there will be a group that go in with a little bit more maybe optimism, hope, intrigue, whatever you want to call it, heading into the season.
I tell you, the guy that it feels like, at least for me, has just been very hard to get notable information on has been Carter Knox, who I would say is right up there with like a Mincy in terms of we heard this name from moment one. Like he's a priority. He's someone they want. You have the connection from Kobe Knox, his brother, who was here last year, had a good experience, and a little bit of movement there, Chris. First, with it being reported by Joe Tipton that he was going to be at Louisville today. Can you survive that visit? I think will be quite obviously a big key. But Jamie Shaw, really for the first time that I've seen nationally, we were hearing things locally about South Carolina and their involvement there. But Jamie mentioning today that South Carolina would be a school to watch among, I can't remember who the other one was, among one other school for a visit if you survive the Louisville trip. So that's kind of a layer there. That's a factor there. That's someone I feel like just is a big priority for South Carolina. There are, I'm sure, backup plans. There are some other guys next on the board. Chris, just like football, they're going to have to fill out this roster too. So I would prepare yourself, even if they start hitting on some of these guys, if you see a name pop up that you say, that doesn't really make sense to me, or what are they seeing in that guy? That might be your seventh man. That might be your eighth man. That might be just like we were talking about with the O-line rebuild in football. Not everybody's going to be recruited. Not everybody's going to have the financial commitment from the school as like starter money, so to speak. So that would be something to keep an eye on. But I do like the group. I like the start with Corey Mincy. Unfortunately for South Carolina, it's really going to come down to, can you close on these guys we're talking about? If they close on these guys, they may have pulled off a roster that you can look at and say that group can compete to be in the tournament, to be in postseason play. If they start missing on a few of these guys, then obviously that's when you start to get nervous if you're them about having to get to that next layer of player.
Yeah, totally. And, you have to build out, to your point, you have to kind of get a sense of, okay, who's your five? But with so much roster turnover this offseason, when you add in Mincy and the returners, what's the numbers at right now, Wes? 4 or 5, guys on the roster technically projected. You're going to have to build out less. Yeah, so your starters, right? But you've also got to plug in some of those other guys that you're talking about that are going to fill out your team and play roles or, be bench players. Those are not as important, but they're still important, in this day and time. So there's a lot of moving parts. The numbers, no surprise here, have gone up once again in the transfer portal in terms of what guys are commanding, what guys are getting. And so that's something that you're going to have to balance out as well. We do know, we've been told South Carolina is going to have a bigger NIL budget. That's absolutely the case. But, the numbers have gone up too. So there's going to be some battles down the stretch.
Remember when the argument was that there isn't any money to pay the players?
Yeah, that was ridiculous. Yeah. People have found it. And you've got schools, when you look at football, basketball, baseball, like if you just kind of go all sports, I mean, schools revenue share is already at 20 something million, but then obviously you've got all these other, whether it's collectives or third party deals or multimedia rights partner deals, those are going into that overall pot, and schools are sitting there 40, 50 million, maybe 60 at some places for a line item that didn't exist, a few years ago.
Well, I mean, LSU reportedly $40 million or close to it football roster.
Just football only. Yeah. Yeah.
So what does that look like when you start adding in? Now it kind of sounds like, for as storied as their baseball program is, that their baseball program has is maybe not getting the support they need or that they want. So here is, as much as I was all for the players being able to get paid for, commercials and for their name and all that. The thing that I dislike about the current structure, you actually put your athletic department against each other. Like you're pitting your basketball team versus your baseball team, your soccer team versus your tennis team. Like they're all fighting for some of that rev share. I almost wonder if it wouldn't have been better if the rev share had to be structured percentage wise within the rule.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like everybody gets the same rev. Everybody can put the same percentage of rev share to each sport. You know what I'm saying? Now I'm sure, are negatives to that as well. But I just hate that every year it's like, well, this team's struggling. We need more rev share. Well, I can't give it to you, but maybe we can take away from the soccer team and give you a little bit of that. But then, okay, now we're hurting the soccer. Like everybody's fighting for those dollars. And there was a thought, Chris, and even when this was presented to me, it was like, I'll believe it when I see it. But there was a thought that teams had to spend so much in the transfer portal on football just to be competitive, that when it rolled around to men's basketball, that might level out a little bit, because everybody just had to push all their money into the pot.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a constant kicking the can down the road, for a while. Oh, the numbers will even out. Oh, they're not evening out. We have to find other ways to spend to keep up. And we just need structure, man. We need some kind of structure. That change you propose for revenue share, maybe that's one part of it. But just having no clear path is just continuing to balloon this thing to where, I don't think the balloon necessarily explodes. It's just making it really hard for everybody to figure out all these moving pieces and to deal with all of it, because it's tough right now.
Yeah, for sure. All right, y'all, come check us out, GamecockCentral.com. We got a spring sale, you would say, going on right now. 50% off. All that portal intel for men's basketball. We've got some women's basketball portal intel as well. And actually, Chris, before we go, do you have another read you need to do?
Yeah, let's tell everybody about Atsco real quick. Atsco.com. You can go check them out right now. They have amazing solutions for all the hunters out there: hunting, waterproofing, personal care, animal care products. Again, that is Atsco.com, ATSKO. Lee Wiles running the show over there. Shout out to him. Does a great job. They've been around for a really long time. You may have used some of their products in the past, even if you don't even know about them. They have really cool waterproofing footwear, clothing, outdoor gear if you're a hunter. They have UV control, odor control, even special laundry that you can use for all of your hunting gear. They've got outdoor gear. Just go check them out now. Atsco.com, ATSKO.com. Appreciate them being part of the show.
Yep, appreciate those guys being a sponsor. Appreciate all of our awesome sponsors right here on GC Live. Appreciate you guys for joining us here for episode number, what do you think it is?
10 million.
10. It feels like it. I have no idea what 1,500. I don't know. Higher, lower? We need to effort that. We'll try to find out. Some people have every single episode numbered on their show. We've never done that. This has got to be way, 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 way up there. So, are you looking at it right now, or are you reading something else?
No, I have no idea. Dude, how many shows? No. How would I find that out in that short
I don't know.
amount of
You were
time?
looking at something like you'd found something
I
out.
found the magic. No, I have not found it.
All right, y'all. We got to roll. He is Chris. I'm Wes. We'll see you very, very soon. Appreciate you for joining us here on Game.